Imagine waking up one day to find that every joy in your life, every smile, every small victory, every fleeting moment of peace is suddenly laced with a quiet ache. You sip your coffee and it tastes like routine. You hug someone you love, and in the warmth of that embrace, a whisper of fear slithers in how long until this is taken from me. You scroll through your phone, laugh at a meme, feel a flicker of connection, and yet a shadow looms behind it all. A question you can't quite name, let alone answer. It's not depression, it's not trauma. You're not broken. You're functioning, performing, participating. And yet, beneath the choreography of daily life lies a throbber low, persistent hum of discontent that never quite goes silent. It's in the silence between conversations. It's in the numbness after pleasure. It's in the loneliness you feel even when surrounded by others. What if this isn't just your problem? What if it isn't personal at all? What if suffering isn't a mistake in the system, but the system itself? What if the pain you try to medicate, avoid, transcend, or silence is precisely what it means to be human? We've been taught to think of suffering as something unnatural, something to be eliminated, corrected, conquered. We're told it's the result of bad habits, unresolved childhood wounds, or misaligned chakras. Self-help gurus promise freedom. Therapists offer coping strategies. Medications promise relief. Spiritual teachers whisper of enlightenment. But no matter how many tools we gather, how many insights we earn, or how hard we try to heal, the ache remains. Maybe you've tried everything. Stoicism, to harden yourself. Buddhism, to detach. Nietzsche, to embrace it. Still, the suffering lingers, adapting itself to your new beliefs. Like a parasite that knows how to hide in plain sight. So here's the question that fractures all others. What if you're not suffering because you're doing something wrong? Because you exist. Not because you failed, but because you're conscious, because you care. Because you were born with a brain wired to desire, to dream, to imagine what could be and then wake up. Again and again, in a world that resists your every ideal, you strive for love and face rejection. You reach for meaning and are met with absurdity. You chase happiness and feel emptier the closer you get. You touch intimacy and recoil at the terror of loss. You taste peace and then time takes it away. Isn't it strange that the very things we are built to seek, belonging, joy, truth, seem designed to slip through our fingers the moment we grasp them? You tell yourself you'll be happy when you get the job. You get a tan soon, want more. You tell yourself love will save. You find it tanned. Now you fear it's ending. You build a life and feel imprisoned by it. You search for freedom and discover it's unbearably lonely. Why does fulfillment feel like a moving target? Why does presence feel like a myth? Why does suffering feel like the only constant? Maybe you've tried to numb it with distractions. Scrolling, shopping, sex, ambition, fantasy, religion. Maybe you've tried to think your way out, analyze it, label it, diagnose it. Maybe you've even told yourself it's noble, that your suffering makes you deep, poetic, spiritual. But what if none of that is escape? What if the more you try to transcend suffering, the more deeply it embeds itself in your being? Because maybe the tragedy is not that we suffer, but that we believe we shouldn't. Maybe that belief, the deep, unshakable conviction that suffering is a mistake, is the true curse. The silent tormentor that whispers something is wrong with you, that compares your internal war to others' curated peace, that keeps you always reaching, never arriving, so you try harder. Meditate longer, work more, talk it out, write it down, shout into the void. Pray to gods you don't believe in, and yet the ache remains. The silence grows louder. The paradox tightens like a noose. What if suffering isn't a prison, but a mirror, not a punishment, but a message? You've been taught to treat pain like a virus, an intruder to be eliminated. But what if it's more like a language, ancient, sacred, relentlessly honest? A voice that says, "This matters, you care, you are alive," and that voice refuses to be silenced. What then? How do you live in a world where pain is not optional, where joy is inseparable from loss, and where the search for peace is the very thing that keeps you restless? We've been asking the wrong question all along. Not, how can I escape suffering? But rather, what is suffering trying to show me? This question, uncomfortable, raw, unresolvables, where everything begins. It doesn't promise relief. It offers something far more dangerous. Clarity. Suffering isn't just pain. Pain is what happens when you stub your toe or lose someone you love. It's sharp, immediate, visceral. Pain comes in waves. It announces itself loudly. Suffering is different. It's quieter. It's existential. It lives in the background. It's the ambient hum of being an ache that doesn't scream but haunts. It's the sense that something's missing, even when nothing is wrong. But what creates this hidden, persistent ache? To answer that, we have to peel back layers of psychology, culture, and philosophy to go beneath the surface of symptoms and find the engine quietly driving the machine. Carl Jung once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." What did he mean? He meant that much of what we call anxiety, depression, addiction, or obsession is simply the psyche's way of avoiding the real suffering we're meant to confront. The deep kind, the sacred kind, the kind that comes from facing who you really are and who you'll never be. Modern society, however, is allergic to that kind of suffering. We are built on the fantasy of avoidance. Every institution from medicine to media, from advertising to academia runs on the unspoken promise, you can escape the human condition. Feel sad, there's a pill. Feel empty, there's a product. Feel lost, there's a guru. Feel trapped, there's a vacation. Feel bored, there's an algorithm, eager to entertain you until you forget. But beneath this architecture of avoidance lies the oldest truth. You are a finite being with infinite longings, and this is the fracture. You are wired to crave permanence in a world of flux, to seek unity in a world of fragmentation, to desire meaning in a cosmos that offers no guarantees, to long for eternal love in a body that dies. And the deeper you feel this contradiction, the more profound your suffering becomes. Arthur Schopenhauer called life a pendulum between pain and boredom. When we don't have what we want, we suffer. When we finally get it, we lose interest. And so we swing endlessly between craving and dissatisfaction, desire and disillusionment. This is not a glitch in the human mind, it's its very structure. The brain evolved not to make you happy, but to make you survive. Happiness is momentary evolutionary bait. Once it pulls you forward, it withdraws. That's why even your proudest moments fade into normalcy. That's why after every success, a new hunger emerges. It's not your fault. You were born into a nervous system designed for lack. But suffering isn't just biology, it's also existential. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that human beings are condemned to be free. That is, we are thrust into existence without instruction, without objective meaning, and yet with the overwhelming responsibility to choose. act, and define ourselves. You are free, but that freedom is terrifying, because every choice you make closes infinite doors. Every identity you assume kills off countless selves you might have been. Every moment you live is a reminder that time is passing, and you can never go back. This isn't a poetic metaphor. This is your daily experience. Why? Does indecision torment you? Why does regret linger like a ghost? Why does the question, what if, keep you up at night? Because you are staring directly at the abyss of freedom that demands you create meaning in a world that offers none by default. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz and founder of logotherapy, believed that suffering without meaning is unbearable. But when suffering is given meaning, when it becomes a response to a larger purpose, it transforms. Yet in a world that has slowly eroded religion, dismissed myth, and mocked metaphysics, where do we find that meaning? We are left with the hollow replacements: career, reputation, status, aesthetics, the curated self, the monetized soul, the spiritualized ego. We seek to feel good instead of to be true. But a life built on image and dopamine cannot soothe an existential wound. It can only numb it temporarily. Nietzsche warned of this. He foresaw the death of God, not as liberation, but as a spiritual famine, a collapse of shared meaning, a rise of nihilism in the guise of progress. And here you are free, informed, connected, empowered, and yet internally unraveling. Because knowledge without wisdom is weight, and freedom without direction is despair. Your suffering is not a malfunction. It is the signal fire of the soul, flaring in protest against a life that avoids its own. Depth. You weren't born to scroll, consume, perform, and die. You were born to wrestle angels, to touch the eternal through temporary hands, to suffer not as a victim, but as a witness. But society no longer has space for sacred suffering. Instead, it offers dopamine and distraction. It medicalizes pain. It packages vulnerability. It profits off your ache. And in this way, the culture becomes a mirror of your inner fragmentation. 1,000 voices tell you how to heal, how to feel, how to become your best self, while none of them ask you to face what you're running from. The truth that nothing you chase will ever fill the void, because the void isn't meant to be filled. It's meant to be felt. That void is the birthplace of real presence, of real love, of real being, and the longer you try to conquer it, the more it will rule your life. So the question isn't why you suffer. The question is, who might you become if you stopped running from it? Because only through suffering deep, conscious, willingly felt suffering you uncover what no philosophy, no guru, no algorithm can teach you: the capacity to live, not in denial of pain, but in intimacy with it. You can go years without realizing it, without realizing how your fear of suffering has reshaped everything about you. It starts subtly. You flinch a little when someone gets too close emotionally, not physically. You choose safety over truth in a conversation. You settle in your job, in your relationships, in your identity. You chase comfort, not because you love it, but because you're terrified of what discomfort might expose. And slowly, your life becomes a kind of camouflage, a carefully curated armor. But here's the truth. Your efforts to avoid suffering haven't saved you from it. They've only changed its shape. You were afraid of loneliness, so you surrounded yourself with noise, but now you feel invisible. In a crowded room, you were afraid of failure, so you chose what was practical. But now you wake up every day with a quiet resentment buried in your chest. You were afraid of grief, so you didn't love too deeply. But now you ache with the longing for something you never let yourself fully feel. The suffering you run from doesn't disappear at messed slay cities. It slips into the way you talk to yourself, into the habits you can't explain, into the dull ache behind your smiles, into the void between what you show the world and what you feel when you're alone. The more you avoid conscious suffering, the more you invite unconscious suffering. It's psychological displacement, cognitive dissonance, neural misfiring. But beneath the jargon, the truth is painfully simple. We trade real suffering for safe suffering, and in doing so, we lose ourselves. The brain, wired for survival, has 1,000 tricks to help you escape. It rewrites your memories to make you feel less vulnerable. It invents stories to justify your compromises. It filters reality so you only see what confirms your comfort. This is not evil. It's protective, but it comes at a cost. Because once your life becomes about protection, it can no longer be about truth. Your friendships become transactional, chosen for convenience, not intimacy. Your goals become external, measured by status, not soul. Your identity becomes performative, optimized for applause, not alignment. Your decisions become reactions driven by avoidance, not desire. And you begin to suffer from something far worse than pain, a slow death of meaning. This is the great tragedy of modern life, that people are not just suffering, they are suffering for nothing. There is no sacredness to it, no fire that purifies, only a constant, low-level dread that numbs rather than transforms. You check your phone hundreds of times a day, not for connection, but to escape your own thoughts. You fill your calendar, not to live fully, but to avoid the silence. You chase success, not for joy, but because you fear irrelevance. And here's the cruelest irony: the world will reward you for it. It will praise your productivity, applaud your hustle, like your posts, promote your discipline, celebrate your ability to function without ever feeling deeply. The system is built to sustain the numbed self, but beneath the surface, something festers. Your body knows the tension in your jaw, the exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure, the illness that has no diagnosis, the panic that strikes in a moment of stillness. These are not anomalies. These are messages, because the body keeps the score end. It knows when you are betraying yourself, the mind follows. It starts to fracture, not in loud ways, but in the erosion of clarity. You find yourself distracted, restless, foggy. You can't focus, can't feel, can't find the words, can't cry. This is what unprocessed suffering does. It splits you. You become two people, the one who performs the life you're supposed to live, and the one who watches from the shadows, wondering when the collapse will come. It's not just individual either. It's collective. A society that avoids suffering becomes shallow. It turns politics into theater, news into outrage, art into content, love into transaction. It idolizes convenience, rewards superficiality, and fears anything that might ask us to feel deeply. This is not a coincidence. This is the consequence of generations fleeing from the fire instead of walking through it. We anesthetize ourselves with algorithms, seduce ourselves with affirmations, distract ourselves with performance, and all the while our capacity for joy, for awe, for transcendence withers, because the truth is, you can't selectively numb suffering. When you shut down pain, you shut down life. Aldous Huxley warned us of this in Brave New World, the dystopia not built on fear, but on pleasure. A society drugged into docility, suffering eradicated not by healing, but by silencing. And in doing so, they lost their soul. Look around, is that not where we're heading? A culture where convenience is king, where silence is feared, where every discomfort is treated like a disease, where spiritual bypassing is sold as wisdom, where we are constantly connected, but existentially alone. You were not made for this. You were made to break open, to bleed meaning, to scream into the dark and find echoes of others doing the same. You were made to mourn deeply, love wildly, risk foolishly. You were made to suffer consciously, because only then do you truly live. So what happens when you stop avoiding it? When you stop managing pain like a pest and begin listening to it like a prophet? You begin to see your suffering not as something to fix, but something to befriend, because suffering, when met with presence, becomes initiation. It reveals you, it burns away the false, it humbles your ego and awakens your essence. It drags you out of the performative self and into something raw, wild, honest, and once you've seen that once, you've suffered with yourself. Instead of against yourself, you can never go back. Because now the question isn't how to avoid suffering, it's how to suffer well, how to make your pain sacred, how to turn your ache into art, how to walk through hell and come out holding your own soul in your hands. That is what the world desperately needs, not more perfection, more people who are willing to walk through the fire, come back with light. This is not about mastering suffering like a samurai monk, or transcending it like some enlightened sage floating above the chaos of life. That's another fantasy and another way to avoid the rawness that makes you human. No, this is something else. This is about rebellion, not the loud, external kind with banners and slogans, but the quiet, dangerous revolution that begins in your inner world. The moment you decide, I will no longer abandon myself to avoid pain, because make no mistake, every time you numb out, every time you distract, every time you chase pleasure to avoid presence, you abandon yourself, you fracture, you exile the parts of you that are inconvenient, messy, or afraid. But what happens when you stop running? What happens when you walk straight into the storm? The first thing that breaks is the illusion that life is supposed to be comfortable, that peace is a default setting, that happiness is a right. Instead, you discover something far more powerful, resilience without armor. You begin to suffer on purpose, not masochistically, but mindfully. You let the pain wash over. You stop trying to solve it. You stop narrating it. You stop using it to prove some inner storyline of brokenness. You just feel it, and then something strange happens. The pain doesn't destroy you. It clarifies you. It burns off the persona. It dismantles the ego. It exposes what is real beneath all the performance. You cry, not because you're weak, because for the first time, you're not lying to yourself. This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And here's where the rebellion becomes sacred. Because in a culture obsessed with positivity, optimization, and constant improvement, choosing to stay in your suffering, to be with it, instead of fixing it, is an act of spiritual defiance. You reclaim the parts of you that capitalism finds useless. Your grief, your confusion, your loneliness, your stillness. You stop turning your life into a product. You stop outsourcing your self-worth. You stop worshipping at the altar of convenience. You Begin to live as if your soul matters more than your social feed. This rebellion doesn't require a new belief system. It doesn't need incense or affirmations or manifesting journals. It just asks you to feel the thing you've been avoiding your whole life, the full weight of your own aliveness. Because beneath every ache is not just Penit's power, the power to face your father's silence and not become it. The power to sit with your childhood shame without letting it define you. The power to forgive yourself for surviving in ways that were never truly living. The power to love again, even when your heart still remembers what it's like to shatter. That's what makes suffering holy. Not that it disappears, but that it transforms. It becomes compost, fertile soil, the dark underground place where your soul begins to grow roots. But to let it do that, you must change your relationship to it. You must stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And start asking, what does this want from me? This isn't about masochism. It's about integration. Because what you refuse to feel, you will project. What you suppress will control you from the shadows. What you deny in yourself, you will judge in others. But when you choose to stay with your pain, not analyze it, not spiritualize it, just stay, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You become someone who cannot be manipulated by advertising. Someone who cannot be seduced by shallow pleasures. Someone who cannot be pacified with distractions. Someone who remembers who they are, even in the dark. And from that place, you begin to create art, connection, intimacy, clarity, prayer, not the kind that seeks answers, but the kind that is itself an act of becoming. This is why the mystics withdrew into silence, why shamans danced through grief, why poets let their sadness spill onto the page, because they understood something we've forgotten. Suffering is not the enemy. It is the doorway, the door that leads, not out of pain but into presence, not into escape but into expansion, not into perfection but into wholeness. And rebellion means choosing that door, again and again, even when it's easier to scroll, even when it's easier to perform, even when it's easier to pretend you're okay. The rebellion is in feeling anyway, too. Let joy break you open without needing to cage it in certainty. To let grief wash through you without making it a pathology. To let love ruin your plans without trying to control its outcome. And most of all, to let life be wildly, chaotically, excruciatingly alive without needing it to be easy. That is freedom. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. Not a life without suffering, but a life where suffering is no longer a threat, it's a teacher. And when you meet it, that way, when you stop treating your pain as the villain, and start treating it as the guide, you discover a kind of invincibility that cannot be faked. The invincibility of someone who has met the fire and did not run. So let the fire come. Let it strip you of what isn't real. Let it show you what's left when everything else is gone. Because that raw, unguarded, unglamorous self is the beginning of your true liberation. There comes a moment quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you stop asking for it to end. Not because the pain is gone, not because you've transcended it, but because something in you has shifted. You're no longer fighting life, you're participating in it, fully, fiercely, without armor. That's the ultimate truth. Not that you must suffer, but that you get to. And that may sound strange, almost offensive. How can suffering be a gift, a privilege? But consider this: if your suffering is the result of caring deeply, of wanting truth, of loving beyond your capacity, of dreaming in a broken world, then what is it, if not sacred? To suffer is to be awake, awake to the impermanence of beauty, awake to the fragility of love, awake to the cost of consciousness. And here is the paradox. The more fully you suffer, the more fully you live. Not because suffering is pleasant, but because it makes life real. It burns through illusion. It calls your soul out of hiding. You begin to realize that every experience, every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of loneliness is a thread in a tapestry far too vast to comprehend. And your suffering, it's the dye that gives your thread its color. If you erased your pain, you would also erase your depth. Think of your most meaningful moments, your most intimate conversations, your greatest insights, your most compassionate gestures. Did they arise from comfort, or did they emerge from the ashes of your own brokenness? Your heartbreak taught you how to love without ownership. Your grief taught you how to hold presence for another's pain. Your failure taught you humility and grit. Your loneliness taught you how to find silence that speaks. Your fear taught you to kneel at the altar of the unknown. Suffering, when accepted, becomes a spiritual inheritance. It gives you access to truths that cannot be bought, taught, or Googled. And in that space, when you stop resisting what is, you begin to see something else entirely, that you were never the one suffering. Not really. The ego suffers, the self-image suffers, the expectations, the attachments, the ideas you had about how life was supposed to be, those suffer. But your essence, your soul, it doesn't suffer. It witnesses, it holds, it watches with quiet strength as the waves rise and fall. It waits patiently as your ego rages and resists and finally breaks. And when you are exhausted, when there is nothing left to defend, it opens its arms and says, now we begin. This is the death before rebirth, the moment when you are stripped of everything except the core of your being. Not your achievements, not your beliefs, not your philosophies, just your presence, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. And in that place, you understand. You were never meant to escape suffering. You were meant to be initiated by it. Just like clay must be fired to become strong. Just like stars are born in collapse. Just like muscles tear before they grow. Just like forests burn to make way for new life. So too must you pass through the flame, not to be destroyed, but to be revealed. This is what all great spiritual traditions point to beneath their metaphors, rituals, and language. Not the promise of a pain-free life, but the invitation to suffer consciously, to die before you die, and emerge more alive than ever. Jesus in the garden, Buddha under the tree, Rumi in exile, even the myths Orpheus, Prometheus, Odysseus, they all walk into the underworld, not to escape it, but to return transformed. You are no different. Your underworld may not look mythic. It may be a divorce, an illness, a betrayal, a loss no one else understands, or just the long, slow ache of wondering what your life is really about. But whatever form it takes, it's yours, and it's sacred. The ultimate truth is not that you must avoid suffering, nor that you must glorify it, but that you must include it in your becoming. Let it shape you, not shrink you. Let it soften you, not shatter you. Let it open you, not define you. Because when you stop resisting the ache, you begin to hear what it's been trying to say all along. You are not broken, you are being broken open. And in that openness, something extraordinary happens. You no longer fear life, because you've touched what's beneath it. You no longer fear death, because you've died 1,000 small deaths and lived to tell the tale. You no longer fear loss, because you've discovered that nothing real can ever truly be lost. You become a living paradox, fragile and unshakable, wounded and whole, human and infinite, and now you are finally free, not from suffering, but from the illusion that it was ever your enemy. You walk through life differently now, softer, deeper, slower, not because you have less to prove, but because you've seen what's true. And what's true is this: suffering is not a detour, it is the path, and the deeper you walk it, the more you realize you were never alone in it, not for a second, because somewhere out there, someone else is aching, someone else is searching, someone else is on their knees, asking the same questions you once did, and now you have something to give them. No answers, no fixes, but presence. You can sit beside their fire and say, I know this place, I've burned here too, and I'm still here. And maybe that is the most beautiful thing about suffering. It breaks your heart open wide enough for someone else to find shelter there.